This episode of Main Street Moxie is proudly sponsored by Northeast Ford and Elise Harney Real Estate. Happy Moxie Monday, Matua Mary. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, thank you. And I'm excited about our guest today.
Yeah, Zoom call to London.
Yes, so very exciting. We're going to be speaking with Nadim Sadek, who is an old friend that I still follow on LinkedIn. And his LinkedIn posts led me to think he would be a great guest for today. He has spent a career in market research and has founded several companies. He's a constant innovator. He loves the thrill of coming up with ideas and executing them. He's also a motorcycle fan and has a Boss Bike Club on YouTube. He manages a music label and he plays music, and he's just an all-around thoughtful and reflective person. So I think we should get right to him.
Let's do it. Elise Harney Real Estate is the #1 real estate agency for the tri-state region, and they provide a comprehensive overview of the regional market spanning Litchfield, Dutchess, Columbia, and Berkshire counties.
Elise Harney Real Estate serves 40 unique communities with 35 years of experience. They have a team of knowledgeable real estate professionals to work with you to buy or sell your house.
Their offices are located in Salisbury, Millerton, Norfolk, Falls Village, and Riverton, or you can visit them online at www.harneyrealestate.com. Nadim, thank you so much for joining us all the way from London. How are you today?
It's a pleasure. I'm great. I'm looking out at autumn colors out of window and a blue sky, so it's all good.
Lovely.
Better than we have here.
Well, the first question we always ask our guests is, how would you define Moxie, and how do you see it operating in your life?
It's an unfamiliar word, but obviously I've had a look at it and I've related it back to quite a lot of stuff that I've thought through my life. And if you'll indulge me doing a quick longitudinal section through my life,
sure,
it'll explain my answer a little bit. I grew up, I'm half Irish, half Egyptian. I grew up the child of a United Nations family. My father worked for the World Health Organization. We moved to every country that had plague and pestilence, basically, as they tried to solve it. One of the things about that experience was that we moved every 2, 3, or 5 years. And I remember, even as a sort of 10 or 11-year-old already, having lived in 3 or more countries. And it was pre-text message, it was pre-mobile phones, it was pre-internet. I remember thinking that I would have to make a new set of friends.
Right.
And that I couldn't pine for the ones I'd lost that I would probably never see again. And it was quite an early lesson in recovery, I suppose, from loss. And being certain that I could invest again in a new network. I mean, I didn't think of it in those ways, but in retrospect, that's what I was doing, that I would never be scared of losing everything because I could always make it again. You know, it was a funny thing. I've only come to realize that more recently. It repeated itself as a kind of lesson in my life when I was in my mid-20s, maybe my late 20s. I was working very hard. I mean, I know a lot of people say they work hard. I really was in the 16-hour a day, 7 days a week job for probably 7 years.
Wow.
And there were moments that were just brutal. You know, you were hungry, you were tired, you're fed up, you're demotivated, yet you had to do a good job. There's another meeting coming. And it was the same thing that, I remember calling it bounceability to myself, which is a term that's never stuck or I've never tried to use publicly. But I always felt I had to be able to bounce, you know, and not be flat. And then I went through a period where I had unremitting success. It was really like, am I Midas? Like, is anything I touch just going to be a great success? Whether it was children or business or events or holidays, it's just like everything was great. And I thought, this is unsustainable. It cannot go on forever.
That's so Irish.
I know, expecting the worst. But I remember having this brilliant, sustained period of success in everything. And indeed, the worst then did happen, for lots of reasons, global financial crises and lots of things, which led to a significant amount of loss in my life. And so I learned that the golden period is not never ending. And that, required me to recover again, to invent again, to do again. And it's a cycle that, we all are used to. And you often hear people saying, oh, yeah, I had a near-death experience and it made me stronger and better and all that. And it's kind of been proven in my life to be true. And then finally, and this is the end of my little soliloquy on the longitudinal Moxie in my life, I was given this bracelet. Now, your listeners won't be able to see a bracelet, but it's a bracelet made in the States, which has got two little beads on it, or two stainless steel balls. One is apparently full of a substance from Everest. So when you're at your height, don't think too highly of yourself. And the other one is a bit of mud from the Dead Sea, which is when you're at your lowest, don't get stuck in the mud. And it was given to me only a year ago, and it's a Moxie bracelet in the context of this conversation. It says nothing's ever absolutely perfect, and never is anything absolutely awful either. And for me, Moxie is just being able to deal with that in your life and be kind of indefatigably able to go, to deal with things, to overcome challenges, and to accept pleasure when it's there, and to embrace joy when it's present as well. It's not only being able to get over the terrible times, it's really being able to stand and be present in the joyful times and say, this is great,
Reading over your various parts of you on your website and articles and little videos on YouTube, you are a brand person in your professional life. But everything I read by you, and when I've talked to you in our long past knowing each other, you're not a surface guy. You're asking the underlying questions, the why questions, the justifications, the real substance of it. And I feel like that just came out in your definition of Moxie. It's like you're a brand Buddha, right? Stay in the present. Impermanence is the name of the game. Yeah. And just not to take things too seriously, and be compassionate. You had on your website 2 poems that your parents, the Desiderata and If.
Yeah.
What is it about those poems that speak to you, or how are those carried forward in your life?
That's very sensitive reading, Mary. Goodness. And way too flattering, really. I'm an atheist. I think I grew up in Asia, in Africa, in Europe, in the Caribbean, in Muslim, Buddhist, Christian, Jewish environments. It's probably going to be terribly offensive to people, but to me, voodoo is voodoo. Just deal with the world in front of you, and accept that that's what your lot is, and this is your time. And so if you take that kind of slightly nihilist view on life, you have to find things to make you happy. Mm-hmm. And the things that make me happy are behaving decently. I'm by no means an angel, and I'm not a person who is of virtue only. I have many wrong things about myself, but the notion of kindness, of being compassionate to people, to recognizing that unless you stood in their shoes, you don't know what their journey's been like. Mm-hmm. And always to sort of anticipate that there's a reason why people are the way they are at the moment that you meet them. I try to do that. I try to do that as much as possible. I have done that with some disappointment. I mean, I have to say, I've invested a great deal in a community recently, in about 100 people. And when I left that community, I thought that the disproportionate effort I'd made at building our relationships would produce a kind of lingering bond. But my goodness, it's maybe 5 out of the 100 have kept it, and that's really pretty sobering in life. But to go back to the poems, I can't remember all the lines, and I haven't rehearsed them anyway. But there is one bit that goes, "Go placidly amidst the noise and haste, and remember what peace there may be in silence. It's like, keep your own counsel, don't cause a lot of trouble if you can help it, speak your mind. And there's another bit that talks about don't ever get too down, basically. I'm paraphrasing now, because if you are really down, it's probably just that you're feeling lonely and tired. It's not that things are really awful. Just go and have a sleep and chat to some people. And I think there's some great universal, helpful truths in both the If and the Desiderata poems. And funnily enough, that of all the kind of world religions that I've read about, and I have tried to read about pretty well all of them, there's a great book called The Lion Book of World Religions. It had 7 religions in it, and then they added atheism as the 8th, which was interesting. And I remember reading it in Manhattan while I drank a whole bottle of wine and looked at my increasingly fuzzy-looking Kindle. It was fun. It was a very sort of imprinting moment in my life. And I think, when the Buddhists talk about take the middle path, don't be an ascetic, don't have nothing, but also don't just blow your brains out with pleasure and other things, take the middle path, moderation. And one of the kind of rules, maybe it suits me to paraphrase it this way, but I've always thought of it, since I first heard it, and I heard it in Thailand first. Live your life whatever way you like, but don't injure anybody else. Mm-hmm. You could kind of almost stop there.
Yeah.
But actually they don't. They say, and don't injure yourself either, which puts a much harder test on you, because if you're blind drunk, or if you're having an affair that you shouldn't be having, or if you're doing, something which is injurious to your companions in some way, even if they don't know, that you are kind of harming yourself too. And I've taken this kind of smattering of things like, we only have what we have in front of us. Don't look to a higher power. Be decent. Try to be kind. Try to be compassionate. And don't hurt other people. And actually, don't hurt yourself either. I kind of make my way with those things.
I want to ask a question about your early life that you had referenced and the exposure to the tremendous diversity, racial, ethnic, religious, economic. How has that informed how you view diversity in your business? Like, there's always these advice to build diverse teams, and diverse teams might be harder and seemingly more work, but they produce better results. Has there been any connection with your ease of being in a diverse situation and creating those?
Again, it's something that I've been reflecting upon recently. I happened to find an album of photos the other day, which were from my time living in Nigeria. I left Nigeria when I was 6, so it's like when I was from 1 to 6. But I then went to live in Nairobi in Kenya in East Africa. So from West Africa to East Africa I went, and I was born in Egypt in North Africa. And I realized, because my father was at the very least a socialist, he was probably even harder edged than that. So he didn't really like sending me to fancy pants expat schools or anything. And as much as possible, I went to local schools. And I realized that I had grown up as a kind of more or less white kid. I'm not white as the driven snow, but I'm, more at that end of the spectrum than being black. And I went to school and had friends and lived in a community of black people. And I've never thought about it. But actually, my first 10 years, I was surrounded by black kids, and I was never once bullied. I never even was made aware of the color of my skin or how I was the different one. And as I kind of became more aware of that kindness and that tolerance that was shown to me, I became, more and more determined. I probably was there already subconsciously, but I became consciously much more determined to be tolerant of everything. It's a hard thing, really, to do that, because to be properly tolerant, you've really got to be non-judgmental about everything. Mm-hmm. Yet you sometimes see something and say, that's wrong. You look at things like penal systems, where there are death sentences, and you think, is it okay for there to be state-sanctioned endings of life? Because if there are, it is easily possible for an individual to say, well, I also am privileged to make a decision, and I'm being circumspect and sensible, and this person deserves to die. And then you've got murder, and you've got, people making all sorts of very profound judgments. And I've really kind of struggled with the notion of war. Why are there armed forces? How can it at all be possible to try to resolve difference through violence? And the fact that it's kind of institutional violence, does that make it any more acceptable? I find these things very difficult, and I'm not sure I've really found my path through it.
Well, I guess I was thinking more of diversity of perspective and view and the importance of that, but that we look for people that think the same as we do, sometimes that look the same. And how important is that diversity of creativity and perspective and the unique skills that each person is bringing to the table? Because we do have these unconscious biases where we're looking for people who reflect us. And I was just wondering if your early experiences with having a constant change up of people in your life help you be more natural at creating that kind of diversity of skills and talents and attributes in your teams.
I have a sort of an affliction, which is that I think of things which I know I shouldn't say, and then I get very close to saying them. I'm very close to telling you an anecdote that describes the way I now approach these things. Let me start in a safer way.
Do we want to do this?
I'm trying to avoid the thing that's trying to press out of my mind into this.
Then let's go to another question.
It might be okay. We'll come back to it.
Okay.
The thing that I'm really enjoying is the non-ending nature of learning and reflection. And somehow you can reprocess things that have happened in your life. I think it can take a long time, and this is where I'm getting closer to the thing I shouldn't really talk about. Men, in particular, I think take a really long time to come to proper self-awareness.
You think?
I've learned as time has gone on that actually, for example, in my last company, I think there were 5 people who consider themselves autistic. We never, said we got 5 autistic people in the company. And there were various other configurations of neurodiversity that we had. I don't know that I have ever really positively sought those diversities, but what I have done is created a culture of tolerance, cross-pollination, interest in other things, and a sort of obvious hunger for having different schools of thought and dialogues rather than monologues that start with me.
So I saw, I think it was one of the interviews that we saw with you. You said that you were either a complete butterfly or capable of doing a few things at the same time. And looking through your very long resume, it seems that, and I have it here, a couple of sheets worth of lists of things that you've done. How has that worked for you? Doing so many different things, and you're part of Boss Bikes. You manage your music brand, the island that you had, fish, music, hospitality, art residency, a whiskey visit. How has this all manifested for you?
I don't know, really. It is a peculiar thing because, typically people like to focus on one thing, and typically success comes from singular focus.
Right.
I've never really been able to do that very well. I know that some people look at me and just think, well, this guy's got ADHD. Because, even while they're in a meeting with me, I'll probably be fiddling about with something else. And I've noticed that I've got some, people would casually say it's OCD stuff. Like sometimes if I'm having a period in which I'm finding it difficult to make everything work, I know that I will do something like polish the screen on my laptop and make everything on my desk perfect. It's as if I cannot make the main things work, so I'm going to make the little things work. And
I can relate to that, yeah.
And in a way, maybe, I've never really thought about it in a sort of self-therapeutic fashion, but it may be that if you have a variety of things which you're doing, like, making, fun motorbike reviews and helping to manage a music artist and maybe doing something else as well, that if the main thing on which your mind lingers every day isn't producing enough dopamine because it's not all going right, you'll find little pockets of it elsewhere and you can switch to those briefly. I don't know. I think music, to turn to a couple of them, I mean, motorcycles started accidentally with me. You know, there's a guy that used to come to us in our house in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, and he'd do stuff with my father, and he'd let me ride his motorbike around the garden. I was 10, you know, and it was a thrill. And then I ended up on a tin mine where I was handed a live revolver and a motorbike, and we rode around, me and this other kid, on these two big motorbikes. Like, I didn't even know how they worked. But the thrill of motorcycling has always stayed with me. And I began to get to a place where I would, you know, be traveling a lot, and I'd go to a hotel, and, you know, you'd kind of resist drinking until 6 or 7, and then you'd get blasted at the hotel bar or something. And, yeah, it's not healthy and it's not fun. And I just thought, well, why don't I try and hire or get a motorbike from motorbike dealers around here and produce an ad, you know, produce a video. And what that engaged me in was talking to a community, talking to a local set of people, learning the highways and byways of wherever I was, and actually having to do something constructive. And although it could be a bit of an imposition on time, it became quite a lot of fun doing it. And they became sort of like little mini travelogue motorbike reviews. And funnily enough, they've had quite a lot of views on YouTube, and I've made a fortune. I think I've made $800 in 5 years of doing them. You know?
Yes.
It's an amazingly remunerative thing to do. But I've saved more money on the whiskeys that I didn't drink because I was
there you go.
So that was just a lot of fun. It was a pleasure. It was a means of engaging and interaction. I always feel that if you talk to people, even the most unpromising interaction can give you pleasure or a thought that sustains you for a day. So I kind of talk to anybody about anything. And motorbikes was one thing. Music, which is the other main thing I've done. I've always thought of as the lingua franca of the world. You know, people unite around beats and rhythms and sounds. You know, it's as if there's something even more primal about sounds than the noises that we make with our mouths to have language. And I've loved the way people can come together around the beat of a drum, you know, or the strumming of a string. So I've enjoyed being involved with music. And when I did the Secret Millionaire stuff, that's who I benefacted, you know, a musical school for people that didn't have a lot of privilege. And that felt really good. You know, there are people that were saved from a more hostile environment by having a music school where they did great things together. And they became a community. And I know that they're all still together and talk to each other, and many of them have married each other, and, you know, it's lovely. So I don't know, life's so accidental. I don't know why I'm into motorbikes and music, but it's come that way.
So what do you play?
I play a few things really badly. I play recorders. I've got a full set of recorders from, you know, sopranino down to bass. I play the concert flute even worse than those, and the Irish flute terribly. But it's such good fun. We were recording an album on the island, and, you know, the most fantastic group of people created this album that we did on the island. And sweetly, they thought, well, because you're the guy organizing this and the producer of this album, why don't you play this, you know? And they taught me a little tune. Not a single take ever worked. It was so bad every time that I couldn't even sample it. So that's what I play.
I've got a budding musical career, if you'd like me for your record label.
What do you play?
I started, all right, if we were in Harry Potter, I would be a muzzle, a non-musical person.
Mm-hmm.
And I was traumatized in my early days by a music teacher who took himself a little too seriously and cut me out of chorus. And so I have taken up the Irish tin whistle.
Have you?
In the last 4 weeks with the Irish Arts Center in New York City. Shout out to my lovely instructor, Kieran. And I'm playing. Like, I'm playing.
Yeah, nice. Good for you.
Yeah.
Are you playing on a D?
A D whistle. And I'm looking around at sessions that I can go and watch and just see what it's like. I don't think I'll ever get to that point because I can't read music. I'm looking at the black and white holes that show where the fingers are covering, but I'm actually generating tunes.
That's lovely. Well, good for you. It is so exhilarating. I play all the time. I've got a recorder right here. I'm not going to play it, but I'll play that 2 or 3 times a day for 5 minutes just for fun.
I think those activities in teaching that I've done about happiness, that adult play is classified as those activities that bring us flow, which is an immersion where time stands still and where there's a challenge, but not so challenging that we're frustrated, but enough that it keeps us interested. And that those flow states are key to well-being, and that you have to look at your life in 360 and figure out ways that you can add that in. It might not be your 9 to whatever job. It might be motorcycles and music. Mm-hmm. So do you find do you ever get stressed? You seem very, how intense are you when you're working?
I don't really know. What people say about me, which is maybe more telling than what I would say about myself, is that I'm really productive. I don't think I am personally. I do nothing for quite a lot of the time. But when I do something, I do a lot of it really fast.
Right.
So, I'll write a paper, in 45 minutes. I think most people, the same guy that told me the story that you're going to cut out and you're not going to let readers listen or your listeners listen to, also said to me one day, do you know how long it's taken me to do this one chart? He'd done a presentation with one chart. And I said, no, I don't. He was quite a tricky customer. I wasn't going to say, 5 minutes because it's rubbish. He said, it's taken me 30 years to do this one chart.
Oh.
And I think there's some truth in that about the way that I work. That there's stuff that's processing all the time. The manifestation of it in an artifact, whether it's something you've written or produced or a thing that you say, is the easy part. That's just that's just a sort of little production process. It's the processing of the meaning and the weighing of the direction you're going and all that I think probably goes on all the time. So I think there's a background intensity to my nature, but there's a sort of a foreground informality. Like, I love being distracted by people. I love not doing things when I'm meant to do them. That's fine. It doesn't stress me.
Does that quote unquote distraction, do you view that as maybe it gets you to think about things differently, or something they may have said will spark something else within you? Because I think that's also just a creative brain, how that functions. And I think a lot of, you're into a lot of things and you have interests and, your flow state even. It sounds like, you just have a very creative brain, and that's needed for your process. And people who don't have that don't understand that kind of thinking and processing. So even though as you said, you may not be doing something, your brain is thinking of all the things. So when you do sit down and that 45 minutes it takes you to write a paper, you've already done the majority, 99% of the work ahead of time. Is that how it works for you?
I think that is right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I remember, when I was an adolescent, I used to write quite a lot of stories, and a couple of them I was really pleased to have published by some Irish newspapers. But I remember sort of making a conscious decision that I would not adopt the life of a writer, because for me to write well, for me to look at a story that I'd produced and think, yeah, that's okay, I used to have to be so miserable for days. The intensity of trying to find the phrase or the storyline or build a character or whatever made me so introspective and so isolated that I often was pretty miserable before I produced a story that was a nice story. And I've sort of become conscious of that. So I try to do most of my processing in a non-punitive way for myself. So if I can't think of what I want to say, I just leave it. Sometimes you've got a deadline. You don't always have the liberty of choosing your own sort of cadence through life. But as long as there is time, whether if the thing is due on Friday, whether I do it on Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday, it doesn't really matter to me. I don't get stressed by it because I'd have done it on Tuesday if I knew what I wanted to say.
Right.
And I sort of argue with myself in the background until Thursday. And I say, yeah, there you go.
I love that spin on procrastination.
I was going
It
to
makes
ask,
it sound so positive.
are you an Aries by chance?
No, I'm Libra, even worse.
Okay. Okay.
Constant weighing of things.
Northeast Ford offers great sales and service, including a no-charge pickup and delivery for any service, even with oil changes. And they offer 2-year unlimited oil changes with any vehicle purchase, new or pre-owned.
Northeast Ford makes buying, selling, or trading in your car super easy. They have charging stations for your electric vehicle and a ready cash now offer and vehicle check on the spot if you wish to sell your vehicle. And they provide help with all the paperwork.
They service 6 counties, and they are located at 182 Route 44 in Millerton, where you can swing by and see Lan and his great sales team.
Or visit them online at www.northeastfordmillerton.com.
I want to ask then, how has this creative process manifested, or how did it manifest in your island and all the things that you did there? Because it looks beautiful, and for a marketing and branding perspective, it is fascinating. And I think you had said somewhere that it was time to kind of practice what you preach, and you implemented it there. So how was that process for you, and what was the inspiration to do that?
It's a kind of a confluence of a lot of largely accidental things, I think. It was part of that, that golden period that I talked about where everything was going right. Well, I built a company that had become very big, and I sold it to WPP and made a bit of money from it. And I bought an island, which is a bizarre thing to do. I bought it first as a sort of giant playground for my family, and it became that. We had boats and tractors, and we planted vegetables, and it was a very, very unelectronic, untechnological existence. It was very beautiful, physically beautiful, and sort of sustainable. We had all our own food, and anyway, it was kind of glorious that way. So that was one that was the impetus to start the island life. I then became very weary of the industry that had given me so much, and I left it. That industry was basically market research and the understanding and the analyzing of brands, which always resulted in giving advice to brand owners as what they should do. I thought, well, stop bloody telling people what to do. Just do it yourself. And I should have just done one thing like whiskey, but I decided I'd do lots of things. So it became hospitality, it became horse breeding, food, music, and whiskey, all under the same brand. But actually, I thought, this is your classic eponymous brand. It was built on the island. It was built with island values. I used to say to retailers, every fish that I sell you, I've looked at in the eye before we harvested it, that sort of stuff. It was good fun. And that was me kind of bringing a brand understanding to a life that I was living and keeping me busy and kind of commercially productive, I suppose. Sometimes I wished I hadn't done that, because I can remember some meetings that were commercial meetings in rooms which were very personal and recreational for me. And I struggle sometimes to, if it wasn't a lovely meeting, to separate that environment psychologically from, the
bad juju.
There's the twin one, which was a lovely, it might have been sitting around with the kids for an evening or something. So I don't always think I did the right thing doing that. But anyway, it was a lot of fun. And again, I'm sorry about all these really long answers, but the thing that I've realized that I am both best at and enjoy the most is origination. And I think I've done quite a lot of things which are iterations to better things. Like I built a market research company, but people had done that before. I just happened to do a slightly better one than somebody else had done at the time. Whiskey, a beautiful whiskey, fantastic bottle, really original, but iterative. And it was only recently when I did the AI business that I really, for the first time, and I realized it as I was doing it, did something wholly originative for the first time. Nobody had ever tried to use AI in brand management, which is what we did. And it needed a lot of neuroscience and a lot of data science. and just creativity. And it was an absolute thrill. And I loved doing it. But it's also shown to me that I'm best as a kind of an operator. I've kind of created a scale in my mind that goes from 0 to 100. 0 is origination and 100 is just pure administration. So if you take a large company like Unilever, which, you know, hands over its Rexona deodorant brand to somebody to manage, they can move the tiller by 2 or 3 degrees in a year. You know, that's what they're allowed to do. But when you're building something, it starts with just a bit of gray matter in your head, and then you have the urge to do it, and you collect a little team, and you get a bit of funding, and you produce a minimum viable product, and then you do a V1, and you end up with a V5, and by then you're at kind of 40 along the scale, and you've got a bit of a business and some revenues and some processes, and by the time you get to about 60, in my definition, which is when you're getting mature administrative tasks and the need for refinement and optimization and cost reduction and organizational redesign and all that stuff, I just get so bored. You know, I just don't want to. There's always going to be a better CEO than me, a better manager than me, a better thinker than me, a better analyst than me. But if you give me something and say, go start it, maybe this comes back to your whole Moxie point. I'm sort of fearless. It's like stupidly fearless. I just don't care. You know, if I feel like doing it, I'm going to try it. And nothing will convince me that it's impossible. So I know that's where my strength is, and where my pleasure comes from is doing that with something original now. And that gets harder and harder to find to do. You know, there aren't that many spaces that somebody hasn't pushed their finger into. So that's what I'm doing at the moment.
How do you even implement AI into marketing and branding? How did that come about, and where do you even start, or where did you start with that? I'm just curious from that perspective.
Well, you basically look at all the things that are the activities within marketing. So you got your creation of your brand, you've got distribution, pricing, packaging, communication, partnerships, blah, blah, blah. You know, it's endless. Yeah. I actually think of it as a caterpillar. And let's say there's a rock in the way of the caterpillar. Mm-hmm. You're not really sure which of the many legs that the caterpillar has that actually helps it succeed in going over the rock that was in its way. Mm-hmm. And you have to disaggregate all of those influences and see, can you measure the impact? Can you measure the investment in them? What was the ROI? You know, what would you optimize? And that's all data science. Yeah. The way that it affects the human mind, which I talked about in the Oxford talk that I gave recently, is fascinating. I think every one of us as an individual is the accumulation of our choices. Mm-hmm. So, you come into the world and you're the son or daughter of, a pair of people usually. And there are choices made for you and foods that you're given. And you as you go to school and become an adolescent and so on, you start making choices about whether you're athletic or, scholarly, or whether you do this or that. And as you end up going through life, you then start choosing brands of things which manifest the values that you espouse. There's only a limited number of brands that I think we can curate psychologically in what I call our personal ecosystem. And that little personal bag of brands that you've curated and become your personal ecosystem are who you are. Which news channel do you listen to? Where do you go on holidays? Which car do you drive? Which politics do you espouse? And so on. I mean, some of them are trivial about, what toothpaste you use, but others are much more impactful on the world. And so AI, to answer your question again in a really long-winded way, can look at the state of mind, the personal ecosystem of a person. And if you imagine it having a sort of semi-permeable membrane around it, mm-hmm. How can you help a brand to penetrate through that semi-permeable membrane to take a place in the personal ecosystem of choices that we make that become the expression of our lives? And so all of those challenges are the ones I kind of thought about together. Like, how do we get into people's minds that they love a brand, and what are the activities that a brand does that we can help them to optimize? That was how AI, that's the AI that I was pursuing in marketing. I'm now using AI in a different field. Mm-hmm. Again, kind of neuro AI, but in a different field.
I'm thinking of this permeable membrane around the brands that are me, that that somehow express my emotional state. I mean, I always thought that things can play not things we need to survive, like food and shelter, at the basic level, but that the things that we want and the buying that we do and the consuming that we do can be driven by unfilled emotional needs that we think some brand or product is going to fill. Mm-hmm. And we have that universe that do those things for us. So if you're trying to get one brand in the bubble, presumably I only have the capacity for X number of brands in my bubble. Does that mean another brand is getting pushed out the other side?
Well, that's exactly the contention that I make, that there's only a limited number of curations that we're capable of making comfortably. Some of them we make very trivially, and some you make very deliberately, mm-hmm. through a process of conscious consideration, which is going to be something like who you vote for. That's one of your choices. Others you make much more subconsciously and reflexively. Those ones can circulate a bit more easily, but they're kind of the deep foundational brands that you have in your in your ecosystem. I think, take it in the States. If you were a Republican and you choose to become a Democrat, you're not going to be both. Mm-hmm. It's going to be tricky to be both for you. So increasingly, I think some people are, but I think the bigger the choice, it'll be and of course we don't have agency over everything. So it's not that we have the great luxury of choice in everything, because you can't afford some stuff. And like I was going to say to you guys, if you're living in New York State rather than New York City, was that a choice? You chose to be outside of the major metropolitan area. Was that a choice? Would you reverse that and live in Manhattan instead or something? So to answer your question, Mary, I think the more foundational brands tend to get sacrificed as you reconsider or bring in something else. And I think the more trivial brands, let's call them that are more subconsciously chosen through your life, can be replaced with much less intellectual expenditure or investment.
Right.
Is there a different science between the brands that would be categories in the want versus need? Because those are two different things. There are certain things, I'd love to get that new Gucci bag, but I need to buy groceries. So I will go to this grocery store because of X, Y, and Z reason. Does the psychology in picking brands and marketing brands differ for those, the want and the need brands?
I'll try to answer it directly. I don't know that I will, though. The thing that drives choice of brands is mainly the subconscious. Mm-hmm. We feel our way through life,
right?
Much more than we think our way through life,
right?
We believe that we think, and that's largely because that we talk, and talk is a very cognitive, conscious activity. It's a skill we've learned. We make these weird sounds, and people understand them,
right?
And they have meaning. But largely, you guys talking to me today will feel this is going okay, this is going to be a good episode, this is not going to be a good episode. And, you'll remember some of the stuff that we talked about, but you'll be left with a feeling of that was a good one, or God, he was disappointed.
We won't feel that way.
Whatever. I have my performance anxiety and I'll keep it to me. So your differentiation between want and need is not always the way that we truly operate at a feelings level.
Right.
Yeah.
You go to the store and you think I need a toothpaste, so I'll invest less in this than if I wanted, something else. But actually, whether you buy Colgate or Crest will have been evaluated by you somewhere subconsciously. Crest feels like the more scientific one, and I like the way the dentist always reassures me, and I'm more prone towards authoritative figures, and therefore I'm a Crest girl, versus Colgate, which is a happy family. Let's all be, clean breathed at the table at breakfast. Which one are you as a person? So I would find it hard to categorize your Colgate versus Crest decision process as want or need. It's like you can't help yourself.
You're basically taking the emotional decision-making life of a person, because that's where most of our decisions are made, on an emotional level, before we could think about it. And then we use reason to justify. I feel like that's what I've seen about neurological research, is that we're emotionally driven.
Well, we're subconsciously driven, and fun enough, subconscious includes rational and emotional.
Okay.
People tend to use them synonymously, but that is a real difference. So if I say to you, is Ferrari expensive? You know what your answer is. You just did it in your head. The answer is yes. It was a rational question which you dealt with subconsciously.
Right. So there's all this happening. And you talked about the decisions that we make, the choices that we make. And then I started thinking of computers and how that's like a decision tree. Mm-hmm. Are you trying to predict I feel like you're using data to predict decisions that aren't completely rational, but that are the accumulation of past choices to predict future ones. It's like Moneyball applied to branding.
It is.
Did you see that movie? Yeah. Okay. I'm just trying to make it something. So now you've done that and you're on to something else.
Yeah.
And what else is there?
The frustration that I had, and I did have a frustration with the AI marketing thing, the brand management thing, is that it had a very weak feedback loop. Oh. So each of those caterpillar legs, you couldn't be sure which one hauled the caterpillar over the rock. Was it the pricing? Was it the new distribution? Was it the packaging change? Was it because they put twice as much in the packaging this month as they did last? Whatever. It was very, very hard to disaggregate the individual impacts of those things, because you couldn't then say, here's a perfect, A/B test where, the package was here but not there, and so on. So what I then thought about was that I love, Mary, you're right, I'm trying to use data to predict what will happen. And it's neuro data, I feel like. I'm into neurotech now. I feel like I'm more into neurotech than marketing, actually, and branding. That's where my domain has shifted out of marketing into neuro stuff. And so what I wanted to find was somewhere that had a beautiful feedback loop first. Like, where will I know whether anything that we say you should do actually has a positive or negative effect? And if you look at something like truck drivers, okay, truck drivers have got three things going on. They've got their affect, they've got their state of mind, their mood, their set of emotions. Then there's the vehicle, which measures everything that they do. How hard they brake, how hard they accelerate, whether they swerve strongly, whether they're fuel efficient, blah, 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 blah. And that's all telematically recorded and processed. And the third thing is that there's contextual data. Like, Google knows where that thing is, and it's going up a hill into a traffic jam where there's an accident, or whatever. So if the guy is pissed off and you can tell that he's driving in an aggressive fashion, and you can explain it because he's on a hill where there's a crash and it's late at night and it's raining, he's fed up, you can then think about how you might intervene in that cab through the existing hardware and help him out. Now, there's a lot of subtlety that goes, whether it's you send him a happy song, or whether you have a voice interaction, or whether you say that there's some sort of reward that he's going to get if he does this, that, or the other. But in any case, what I'm interested in is this very kind of specific environment where you have a mind, what drives the driver is my new thing. And if you can, but by the way, trucking is a tough industry. It's got the highest mental health problems, the highest rate of STDs, the greatest churn and lack of retention per year of all blue collar work in the States. It's a tough industry. So if we can help these guys to have a more fulfilling, job satisfied life, and we improve safety while we're doing it, and make a fleet more efficient for its operator, it's like it's a virtuous circle, so that the insurers have less risk, the operators have less costs, the drivers are happier. And where are we getting that from? We're getting that from just understanding what's going on in the driver's mind and helping him out. And I say him because in the States, 92% of drivers are male.
So one way to accomplish that is to make sure they're not driving behind me. I am a constant frustration to truckers. So I'm envisioning the focus groups or the data gathering. Like, I'm thinking of my son did his thesis on expected goal analytics in soccer, that if you knew where the ball was going and the angles and where the players are, and part of that data is those vests that the soccer players are wearing, which is constant biofeedback, or if that's the right word. So do you foresee that you would have focus groups, instead of just people sitting around a table, that you would have neurosensors or some kind of instant feedback loop that they would register what they're feeling when using the product? Or I saw you shaking your head. Is that like completely crazy?
That's nothing is completely crazy. I think, I mean, almost to my shame, I've become a real enthusiast for implicit data. It's what we don't explicitly articulate. I've come to distrust the spoken word. Here we are on a podcast. I mean, people say stuff, and it's like, if it was in recyclable packaging, I'd buy it, and they never buy it. They want the detergent that makes the clothes whiter, not the bloody thing that you can. Sorry, I keep swearing on your podcast, and I know that gets you in trouble.
I don't think bloody is a curse. We're good.
So I've become much, much more interested in understanding what's going on implicitly. So if you take something like a focus group, and this is why I say to my shame, because I made a fortune through running focus groups. I was probably the biggest dealer of focus groups in the world at one point. They're just people talking, and people don't tell you exactly what they feel. They tell you what they think. And actually, 90% of our behavior results from what we feel, not what we think. So why don't we try harder to understand what people feel? The reason we don't try harder is it's really difficult. You need an electroencephalogram or some other weird intrusive thing. And I know a company that's putting them on astronauts now to figure out what's going on in the astronauts' head as they go along. There are actually, thank goodness, through neuroscience, a lot of proxies for those sorts of quite invasive things like implicit response timing. I ask you a question. When I asked you the Ferrari question, you knew your answer very quickly, didn't you?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's a hard positive. That's a strong positive. I know that you know for sure that Ferrari is expensive, and you feel that. So, if I said to you, is Ford expensive, you're going to hesitate a bit longer because some are and some aren't,
Right.
And so it goes on, and you can measure those things. You can measure those hesitations and those urgencies, and that reveals quite a lot about the mind. So what I envisage is quite a lot of AI decoding of signals. Some of it is through implicit response timing. I'm really interested in facial processing now, not facial recognition per se, but the little twitches around our mouths or the little tiny creases around our eyes that display pleasure or displeasure and so on. And actually that's what I want to use in these closed environments, that if you can imagine a camera in most truck drivers' cabs, you can process their looks. It doesn't have to be anything personally invasive or ethically inappropriate because it's not personalized. It's just you can tell when drivers are getting melancholic or unhappy, and it's very interesting that an angry driver is a slightly better driver than a sad driver.
Yeah.
You actually want to kind of get an ideal driver profile who is sentient and alert, but consistent and not overly stimulated, and certainly not distracted by sadness. So understanding what's going on in people's minds through the signals that their bodies give or the answers that they give. And I think multimodal signals are the best. So tell me how you feel, answer some questions, and I'll also watch you. And that's much more robust than just I'll only watch you or I'll only listen to you. But the place that I don't really want to go very much anymore is just asking people what they feel. Because
people lie all the time.
They don't even mean to lie.
I know. They just want to sound better. They want to tell you what they want to hear. what you want to hear.
Or the thing that's appropriate for the context, or,
Right.
you know, just a lot of pressures.
So that's what you're doing now.
Mm-hmm.
Where are you in that? Are you at the very beginning, ideating?
I'm climbing into the cab.
Okay.
The journey is just beginning. I've assembled a small team, great, clever set of people that are good with all the things that we need, and we're beginning to iterate a commercial proposition out of it, and talking to some people that are very interested in it, because I think people are very much concentrated on behavior and context, when actually affect is probably the biggest influence. And I think it's partly that, you know, trucking, for example, is an incredibly masculine environment. The drivers are all men. The insurers are mainly men. The fleet operators are men. You know, there aren't any questions like, how are you feeling today, buddy? You know, it's like, no, like doing 40 and a 30, you know, so you're a violator and, you know, you're getting a 20% wage cut. That's the way the dynamics of relationships work there. And so I think we've got a real opportunity to feminize and empathize in this area.
So the evolution of the trucker,
I think so.
Industry.
Yeah. But then, it becomes every Uber driver, and it becomes, your son. It's like, I think there's a huge opportunity. And I say it because I know it's a fear that people have, that it doesn't need to be intrusive, and it doesn't need to be Big Brother. It can simply be a means of you being in a better state to do the things that you're trying to do.
So we're at that time, Nadim, the time when we ask you, what advice would you have for someone to, in whatever part of their life, doesn't have to be business, could be personal, to just inject a little more Moxie affect into their lives?
I am really ambivalent about it, because what I would normally say is be fearless, and don't be told no, or don't be told it's impossible. I mean, so many people say that. I've begun to have a bit of discomfort with what nobody really seems to question anymore, which was, oh, it's great, it pushes me outside of my comfort zone. I'm not sure that's the right thing in life. It just so happens that my comfort zone results from standing on the edge of a cliff a lot of the time.
Right.
I like hovering near the edge of a cliff. That's what seems to get me going. But I wouldn't recommend that to somebody that is comfortable with security and consistency and predictability.
Right.
I think, know your own mind, and don't be pushed beyond what makes you feel you are you. So if you are a maverick risk taker that loves pushing boundaries and being inventive and originative, go for it. I mean, never have a fear. Enjoy, and expect quite a lot of bumps and bruises along the way, because there is no chance that you will keep your roller blades, straight up all the time if that's the way that you live. If, on the other hand, and I don't mean to make the sound in any way less attractive, but if, on the other hand, you wish to have a less precarious existence, where happiness and fulfillment flows from consistency and predictability and perhaps simpler joys, don't let anybody push you beyond that. And don't let anybody say, oh, you got to get outside of your comfort zone, you got to push yourself and learn new stuff. Enjoy yourself. Live. We don't have that long. Live it well. Live it comfortably.
Amen.
That's great.
Nadim, thank you so much for spending time with us today.
It's been fun.
It was wonderful to hear all your life stories and experiences, and just your how you approach things. It was very eye-opening. So I enjoyed it tremendously. Thank you so much for taking the time and sharing it with our listeners.
You're very sweet to say so. Thank you for your patience in listening to me and being tolerant.
Oh, and anytime you want to do a little Zoom session with the Irish flute, you know where I am.
That would be fun. We should try it, Mary. You won't have to get very, very good to match me. So
yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm sure. All right, Nadim, take care.
Thank you.
Pleasure to see you. Nice to meet you, Thorin. See you again.
as well.
So, Thorin, what'd you think of Nadim?
I thought I was blown away by him. First of all, I was initially pretty intimidated, I got to admit, reading his resume, looking at it through his entire website, which is amazing. The amount of stuff he does, his words and how he tells the story of it, watching the different YouTube things he's been on and interviews. But talking to him, it was quite nice, that initial, little intimidation that I had faded away so quickly, just hearing him tell the story and how he views things and approaches things with his life experience, which is so vast. And I didn't bring it up, but on his website, he had mentioned a couple of guides in life that included, it costs a lot to earn a lot. You never feel worse after a shower. And when they're all annoying you, it's you. And I don't think we had to bring it up because he talked about so many different things that kind of encircled those kind of mantras too. But his whole approach and I think his artistic mind, I was very inspired by him and I had a great time. How about you?
His brand of creativity is one that's very thoughtful and reflective, and he's always thinking on a deeper level. And I really enjoyed when he talked about how he's kind of done the task in his head.
Yes.
And done all the thinking, and then just the execution is the culmination, the last, the cherry on top from what he's been thinking about. And I love his fearlessness. I aspire to it. I wish I could do to him what he wants to do to truckers, to just try to really find out what is going on in that moment of his action or thought. Yeah. Because I would like to dissect creativity in that way. So I think he's a great human, fun to be around, and lives a life of Moxie.
He certainly does. And I hope our listeners enjoyed hearing him and his life philosophy and approach to things. And, but at the end of the day, even though he has taken some big leaps of faith, if you will, I don't think to him it seemed like a big leap of faith, but to others, it may seem like, oh my God, I could never even fathom doing that. But as he said, at the end, you just have to be true to yourself and don't have other people push you to do something that is outside of your personal character. So I think that's also important to remember that, my courage or my, wanting to jump into something is very different from yours, but, my methodology doesn't work for you or may not, but you may look at one fraction of what I do and be like, oh, I could tweak what I do. So I think, his saying that, was really important. And I hope our listeners not just enjoyed hearing his story, but his ideas and philosophy on things.
See you next time.
All right. Sounds good. Bye, Mary.
This episode of Main Street Moxie is proudly sponsored by Northeast Ford and Elise Harney Real Estate.